The US economy in 2026 is not what the headlines say. While some celebrate record stock markets, others can't afford rent. Welcome to the most confusing economic era in modern history. I'm going to break down exactly what's happening with America's economy right now, no political spin, just facts. Let's start with the big picture. The United States dollar remains the world's reserve currency. About 58% of all global foreign exchange reserves are held in US dollars. But cracks are definitely showing. Inflation peaked at 9.1% in June 2022, the highest level in 40 years. The Federal Reserve responded with the most aggressive interest rate hiking cycle since the 1980s. They raised rates from near 0 to 5.5% in just 18 months. By 2024, inflation cooled to around 3%. But here's what nobody talks about: prices never came back down. A gallon of milk that cost $2.50 in 2020 now costs over $4.50. A loaf of bread went from $2 to almost $5. Rent in major cities increased between 25 and 40% in just 3 years. Average Americans are spending over 35% of their income on housing alone. GDP growth remains surprisingly resilient, hovering around 2.5 to 3% annually. But this growth was incredibly uneven. Tech companies boomed while small businesses struggled. The richest 10% of Americans own 90% of all stocks. So when markets hit record highs, most Americans simply did not benefit. Now let's talk about the job market, because this is where it gets really confusing. Official unemployment sits around 3.7% to 4.2%. On paper, that looks fantastic. But the real story is far more complicated than a single number. Labor force participation dropped significantly. Millions of workers left the workforce during the pandemic and never came back. The official unemployment rate does not count people who stopped looking for work entirely. Real unemployment, including discouraged and underemployed workers, is closer to 7%. Here's the real kicker. Many of the jobs that came back are gig economy positions. DoorDash deliveries, Uber rides, freelance contracts with no benefits. No health insurance. No retirement plan. No job security. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that full-time employment actually decreased since 2020, while part-time and gig work absolutely exploded. Remote work completely changed everything. Companies discovered they could hire talented people from anywhere. This created a two-tier job market. Knowledge workers who work from home in comfortable apartments with six-figure salaries, and service workers who must show up in person every single day for minimum wage. The gap between these two Americas is growing wider every year. Speaking of apartments, let's talk about housing, America's single biggest economic pain point. The median home price in the United States crossed $420,000 in 2025. Up from just $280,000 5 years ago. That's a 50% increase. In some metro areas like Austin, Miami, and Phoenix, prices doubled. Mortgage rates hit 7.5% in late 2024 before cooling slightly to around 6.5%. A $400,000 home with a 30-year mortgage at 6.5% costs over $2,500 per month in principal and interest alone. That is before property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. You need to earn at least $90,000 a year just to qualify for that mortgage. First-time homebuyers are locked out completely. The average age of a first-time homebuyer climbed to 36 years old. And that is just the average. In expensive cities like San Francisco and New York, it is closer to 40. Young Americans are stuck renting, and rent is not cheap anymore. Average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in major cities ranges from $1,800 to over $3,000 per month. Nationwide, about half of all renters are considered cost burden, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. There's simply not enough housing. The U.S. has a shortage of about 4 to 7 million homes. Building costs are sky high due to material costs and labor shortages. Zoning laws in many cities prevent dense development. And construction workers themselves are in short supply. This problem took decades to create, and it will take decades to fix. Housing debt can't be ignored either. Total mortgage debt in America is over $13 trillion. That's more than the entire GDP of China held by American homeowners in the form of debt. Now let's talk about the debt spiral, because America is absolutely addicted to debt on every level. Total U.S. national debt surpassed $36 trillion in 2025. That's over $100,000 per taxpayer. The federal government now spends more on interest payments alone than on national defense. Think about that for a second. We pay more to service our debt than to protect the country. Student loan debt stands at $1.7 trillion across 43 million borrowers. The average graduate owes $38,000. Many will not pay off their student loans until their 40s or even 50s. This debt delays home ownership, delays marriage, delays having children. It reshapes entire life trajectories. Credit card debt hit $1.2 trillion, the highest ever recorded in American history. The average interest rate on credit cards is now 22%. If you carry a $5,000 balance and only make minimum payments, it will take you over 20 years to pay it off. You will pay more in interest than the original purchase price. The credit card industry literally banks on your inability to do math. Car loans have become insane. The average new car payment is over $700 per month. Used cars average around $500 monthly. People are buying cars they absolutely cannot afford with loans they cannot sustain. Auto loan delinquency rates are at their highest level since 2010. So where does all of this go? What happens next? Economists are deeply divided, and honestly, nobody really knows for sure. The optimists point to massive AI productivity gains. Companies like Nvidia, Microsoft, Google, and OpenAI are investing hundreds of billions of dollars in artificial intelligence. Historically, every major technology revolution, electricity, the automobile, the internet, smartphones, eventually raised living standards for everyone. AI could follow the same pattern. The pessimists worry about the transition period. AI could eliminate millions of white-collar jobs before it creates new ones. Truck drivers, accountants, customer service agents, paralegals, all potentially replaced. If history repeats, the benefits will flow primarily to capital owners while workers get displaced and left behind. The Federal Reserve is walking an impossibly tightrope. Cut rates too fast and inflation comes roaring back. Hold them too high and the economy tips into recession. There is no easy or painless solution. Every option has serious trade-offs. The 2024 election brought sweeping changes: new tariffs on Chinese goods, restrictions on immigration, major corporate tax reforms, and massive deregulation efforts. The long-term economic effects of these policies remain deeply uncertain and hotly debated. One thing I know for certain: the American dream, the fundamental idea that each generation does better than the last, is under serious pressure. For the first time in modern history, young Americans may not achieve the standard of living their parents had. Whether this is a temporary correction before the next boom, or a permanent shift in America's economic trajectory, depends entirely on choices being made right now. The economy is not one story. It is millions of individual stories happening simultaneously. Some are winning big. Many are barely surviving. And yours is still being written. Stay informed, stay critical, and never stop asking questions.